Hello viewers, let's consider this topic. It's one of the most simplest topic in chemistry, and most students get confused when they're talking about elements, compounds and mixtures. Most students will see a compound and refer it to as a mixture. So today we are going to distinguish between elements, compounds and mixtures. So now, first of all, what is an element? We're starting from an element. What is an element? So an element is a single substance that cannot be split into, it can be split further into simpler substance. So the simplest aspect, it consists of only one type of atom. That means it cannot be split into what? Simpler substances. Example of an element we know in chemistry, there are a lot of elements like hydrogen is an element, oxygen is an element, copper is an element, carbon, nitrogen, etc. These are all examples of elements. They are made up of one type of atom, so it cannot be split further into simpler substance. Now let's look at what a compound is. Now when we are talking about a compound in chemistry, we are talking about substances that are made up of what? More substances that are chemically combined together. They are made up of what? Elements or different substances that are chemically combined together and cannot be separated by physical processes. They cannot be merely separated by physical processes. So compounds are made up of what? Two or more elements or two or more substances. Example of a compound is water. Water is a compound. Carbon dioxide is a compound. Eh? An acid. This acid, the transverse of the 6 acid is a compound. This is sulfuric acid. It's a compound. So compounds are represented by what? They have different elements. This is hydrogen and oxygen combined together. This is carbon and oxygen. They are combined together chemically. They are chemically combined, so they cannot be separated by what? By physical processes. So you check for elements here. They are just single elements with single atoms. They are just single elements with single atom. They cannot be what? Broken down further. But a compound can be what? Can be broken down by chemical means, not by physical processes. They can only be broken down by chemical processes. So they can undergo different chemical reactions. It can be decomposition, electrolysis, or so on to be broken down. Now we also have mixtures here. Now we're going to see what is a mixture. A mixture is what? A substance that is made up of two or more substances that are physically combined and can be separated by what? Physical means. A mixture can be what? Separated by physical means because they are not chemically combined. So let's check what are the examples of mixtures. Example, milk. Milk is a chemical. Is a chemical. So it's made up of what? Different substances, but those substances are not chemically combined. For example, milk comprises of sugar, water, and proteins. So it is what? A mixture. These mixtures can be separated. Another example of a mixture is the blood. The blood is a mixture of proteins, water, and also a mixture of drugs or hormones, etc. So there are other mixtures. Another example of a mixture is maybe a mixture of sand and iron filings. Mixture of sand and iron filings. That is a mixture. Maybe sand and iron filings. Another example of mixture, bronze. Bronze is an alloy. It is a mixture of copper and tin. So you can write down other examples of mixtures in the comment section. Now we have now seen the difference between elements, compounds, and what? And mixtures. These ones are made up of single atoms and cannot be split further into simpler substances. Why this is made up of what? two or more substances or two or more elements that are chemically combined and cannot be separated by physical means. Now, this man here, which are mixture, chemical reactions, and so on, we can use it to separate compounds. But in mixtures, there are different chemical and physical processes that can be used to separate mixtures of different substances. For example, now we call them the separating techniques in chemistry. Separating techniques. So we call these the separating techniques in chemistry. We can use them to separate mixtures. For example, now mixture of salt, salt and water. How can you separate a mixture of salt and water? You can use a physical process like evaporation to dryness. We can heat water in a mixture of salt and water, and then the salt will remain while the water will evaporate. So we can separate them by what? Evaporation. So the different techniques are we can use number one, evaporation. We have sieving. We have chromatography, distillation, fractional distillation, and so on. So these are the different methods. We have other methods. Evaporation to dryness, you can use this to separate a soluble solute from a solvent, from a solvent. So you can use it to separate a mixture of salt and water, or sugar and water. So this sieving can be used to separate a mixture of what? Solutes that cannot, that insoluble solutes, and you can use it to separate mixtures of what? Two different solids that are mixed together. For example, maybe you want to separate a Gary from the shaft. You can use the method, the sieving method. Chromatography for using separating components that have colors. And that means those colors can have different migration speed. So you can use it to separate this any components. Maybe this is applicable in ink dye companies that produce dye and other color substances. So you use them in that area, in that aspect. Distillation, you can use it to separate a mixture or two liquids that are mixable. For example, maybe ethanol and water. You can use this method to separate a mixture of two mixable liquids. Fractional distillation is applicable in separation of oil, breaking down or separating the different oil fractions. So you can use it in, they are mostly used in industries, in oil industries, to separate what? Mixture. So these are the different separating techniques that we can use to separate mixtures. Now we now know the difference between elements, compound, and what?